And now I want to finish up by talking about these last few sins of memory. The first of which is called misattribution. We have probably all experienced misattribution. Anytime maybe you and a sibling or you and a friend recall something that happened to you in the past, and you remembering it as having happened to you when in fact it happened to them. Again, remember, every time a memory is retrieved from long-term memory, it's being reconstructed or reconsolidated. That leaves it very prone to error. You can look at another example of misattribution. Maybe you're sitting around talking with a group of friends, and you're like, oh, remember when this happened to us? Yeah, like we were at the mall. And somebody turns around and says, no, we weren't at the mall. We were at the park when that happened. That would be an example of misattribution. So wrongly, or rather associating memory with a wrong time or person or place would be an example of misattribution. And our next sin of memory is called suggestibility. We are very highly prone to suggestion and to misinformation. So our memories can become distorted as a result of someone, for example, giving us incorrect information about something that has happened. Or let's say we're fed a piece of misinformation about something that happened in our past, and what happens is we keep then imagining it that way. Imagining things that didn't actually happen to us can actually create false memories. And Elizabeth Loftus, who I have a clip of her speaking on one of the previous pages in your notebook, she is the researcher who is associated probably the most with research in suggestibility. An example of her research is done in what is called framing. How when individuals are asked leading questions, sometimes questions even that have misinformation in them, that can really influence their memory of events. Loftus did research where she took two groups of participants and she showed them all the same exact footage of two cars coming into contact with one another. So they all saw the same footage of the cars coming into contact with one another. But one group was asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, and the other group was asked how fast were the cars going when they bumped into each other. And she even added a little condition that was where she asked, was there glass at the scene? And what she found among her participants is that the verb that was used, how the question was framed, very much affected the speed that the participants remembered the cars traveling. Again, the way in which a question is framed can very much influence an individual's memory for how an event occurred. The misinformation effect occurs when someone is fed a piece of misinformation and then remembers that thing actually having happened to them. So this is another experiment that Loftus did, where again, she showed all the participants the same exact footage of a sports car traveling along a country road. But one group was told that there was a barn. So here's the wording. How fast was the white sports car going when it passed the barn while traveling along the country road? The other group was asked, how fast was the white sports car going while traveling along the country road? 17% of the students whose question mentioned this non-existent barn, there was really no barn in the footage at all, claimed to have seen it later on. Less than 3% of control subjects recalled having seen a barn. So I hope this already has you thinking about things like interrogations of suspects or questioning of suspects. The way in which interrogators ask questions to witnesses can very much influence the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. This is something that really, has to be taken into account. And one thing that experts say, is that confidence in memory is not at all a sign of accuracy. In other words, the more confident that someone is that their memory is correct, the more skeptical experts tend to be of the accuracy of that memory. If you were to ask the public, this is from National Geographic, or rather give this statement to the public, in my opinion, the testimony of one confident eyewitness should be enough evidence to convict a defendant of a crime. Look at the response of the public compared to experts. experts like Elizabeth Loftus, who study things like suggestibility and framing and the misinformation effect and the fallibility of our memories, overwhelmingly disagree with this statement. And will say that we absolutely should put far less weight on eyewitness testimony. And here's another one. Human memory works like a video camera, accurately recording the events we see and hear so that we can review and inspect them later. I mean, you don't get any experts here in this poll that will agree with that statement at all. But yet, look at the misunderstanding of the public about the way in which our memories actually work. Of course, you are not, right? You would be down here because now you're starting to understand the fallibility of our memory, but the vast majority of people do not. So you look at organizations like the Innocence Project, who work to exonerate individuals who have been wrongly accused and in some cases have been placed on death row. And eyewitness misidentification is a factor in over 75% of wrongful convictions that are eventually overturned by DNA testing. I mean, these are really some startling statistics. In about 25% of DNA exoneration cases, innocent defendants made incriminating statements, delivered outright confessions, or pled guilty. This is something Elizabeth Loftus says. We tend to think that if someone confesses to a crime, well, they must have done it. They certainly could not have admitted to something that they didn't actually do. However, that's just not the way that it works. I mean, all of her research and suggestibility suggests that it's much more common than we think for someone to give a false, admission of guilt. All right. And again, there's scientific data that suggests that even the most confident eyewitnesses to an event are wrong about what happened at least 30% of the time. So Loftus and other memory researchers have really been kind of revolutionizing the way that the court system views eyewitness testimony. All right, so the last of our sins of memory, the last two, are bias and persistence. We've talked an awful lot of about cognitive bias and errors in our thinking, and these pertain to our memories as well. Expectancy bias. We have a tendency to distort events that we recall to make them fit our expectations. So, for example, if we're thinking back to a time when our favorite sports team played a game against their biggest rival, we remember them having won when in fact they lost. Well, maybe we look back and we expected they would have won that game because they tend to win against this particular team. And that expectation can actually influence the memory that we have. So we can remember them wrongly having won just because that's what we expected. And self-consistency bias is another one. We have the tendency to believe that we are much more consistent than we actually are. So there's research in this that dates back, I think, to the late 70s, where they took a group of individuals and they asked them questions related to their political ideology. And then they followed up years later with them, again, asked them about their political ideology. And what they found is these individuals, though their ideology had changed, they remembered themselves as always having those same beliefs that they had when they were older. All right, so we have a tendency to believe that we're much more consistent in our beliefs than we actually are. And our last sin is persistence. This is a memory problem where unwanted memories can't be put out of our mind. All of us, right, are sometimes haunted by things that have happened to us in the past that we just can't forget. I don't know if anybody else has experienced it, but every once in a while something will pop into my mind, maybe an embarrassing situation, right? And all of a sudden, even though it's completely irrelevant, I just can't stop thinking about it. And then the emotions come back and it can be very, very overwhelming. So that is our last sin of memory, wrapping up this part of the unit, persistence.